Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Macy Halford from the Oswald Chambers Publications Association to discuss her work in modernizing the classic devotional, My Utmost for His Highest. This is a resource that ABHE is providing to all of our member institutions free of charge, thanks to the generous support of so many in our Leading Higher capital campaign. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of the Association for Biblical Higher Education. And if you're a regular listener or watcher of Biblical Higher Ed Talk, especially those of you who are watching, you'll look at my background and say, that's not the normal background. Or if you're listening, you're probably saying that, what kind of microphone is he using? So I'm actually on the road, but thanks to wonderful technology, I'm able to record this episode with Macy Halford, who I'll introduce here in a second. And actually, Macy, and this is the beauty of technology, she's actually joining us from France, where she lives with her husband. But our guest this week is Macy Halford. She's from the Oswald Chambers Publication Association. And she has been working hard over the last 3 years to rework Oswald Chambers' classic devotional, My Utmost for His Highest. And for those of you who are tuning in that are part of ABHE, you know that part of the capital campaign, we've raised funds for the distribution of this rewrite. And we are literally in the process of distributing 50,000 copies of this classic devotional that has been rewritten for a new generation. And when I think about the impact of what 50,000 copies of this all across North America could have for the kingdom of God, we get pretty excited. So we thought it would be a great idea to invite the person who did all of the work for 3 years and is actually working now on a translation of this into the French language. If you had a chance to meet Macy, so I have invited her in to chat about Oswald Chambers and this devotional as just context for those of you who are receiving the free copy of the devotional. So Macy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you bet. So number of questions that we're going to work through to kind of understand a little bit of who Oswald Chambers was. And then we'll also talk about the actual devotional itself and the impact that it's had. I know Oswald had a connection to at least one of our member schools, but start us off by giving a brief context as to who he was and what led to him writing this devotional.
Okay, gladly. So Oswald Chambers was born in Aberdeen, Scotland, in 1874. He was the son of a Baptist minister. And in his youth, he was really a devout kid, but he never wanted to become a minister, really against it. He wanted to be an artist. So in his early 20s, he went to Edinburgh University to study painting and to try and make a living at it. But he couldn't make ends meet. And eventually he took this as a sign that God was telling him that he needed to go into the ministry.
So was he, would you say he was have you seen any of his artwork?
Oh, yes. He was an excellent artist. Yes.
He was. Okay. All right.
He has a portrait of Beethoven, which is famous and which is very filled with Sturm und Drang. Yes. Very, very passionate and bold artist.
Okay, so that didn't work out.
Illustrations, basically, and he couldn't make ends meet, and so he took this as a sign that he needed to go into ministry. And in his late 20s, he enrolled at a small Bible college in the Highlands of Scotland in a little town called Dunoon. Now, in Dunoon, Chambers was ordained as a Baptist minister, but he quickly became more associated with the holiness movement, which was really thriving in this place and time. So we're at the very beginning of the 20th century. And yes, so in his early 30s, he set out as a missionary with a holiness organization called the League of Prayer. And it was on his first trip with this league. He was sailing to Japan, but he stopped off first in the United States, and he visited God's Bible School and College in Cincinnati, Ohio, which I think is the member school you must be referring to.
You got it. Yep.
That's right. Okay. So, so he visited God's Bible School for the first time in 1907, and he gave a talk, and the school liked him so much that they invited him to stay on for a semester as a visiting lecturer, which he did. And then he also returned over, I think it was 3 or 4 more years. He came back for their annual camp meeting. So he was able to develop quite a meaningful relationship with this college. And I think they still love him there. I've never been there, but apparently they have an Oswald Chambers room on campus, as well as a campus dog called Ozzy.
How about that? Yep. Yeah. Great. It's a great school. They're members of ABHE. Rodney Loper is the president. They're doing a great job, and the school has actually contributed for this project.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. I didn't know, but that's awesome. And the dog in particular is a great tribute to Oswald because he loved dogs and he loved roaming the Scottish countryside with his own dog, whose name was Tweed. Is really adorable. That is. Okay, so to jump ahead, and this is a very brief version of his biography, but there are so many resources out there. We'll maybe mention them later for anybody who wants to know more. So it was on one of these mission trips on the crossing that he made in 1908 that we can locate the genesis or the seed of My Utmost for His Highest. Because it was on a boat bound for America that Oswald Chambers fell in love with his future wife, Biddy Chambers. Okay, so Biddy Chambers, this is not her birth name. She was born Gertrude Hobbs, but on this boat, Oswald gave her a nickname, BD, for beloved disciple, because she was so devout. And this then became Biddy. And she kept this name for the rest of her life. Her daughter said that her mother never, ever called herself Gertrude again. And most people, when they met her in later years, didn't even know that Biddy wasn't her real name.
So did she spell it? Did she spell it differently, like Bitty then, or?
She spells it Biddy, like an old Biddy.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah, and you'll see sometimes she would write a little foreword to I'm getting ahead of the story. Anyway, yeah, she always put Biddy Chambers as her byline. Okay, so in any case, Biddy, when she met Oswald, she was 24 years old. She was going to America to seek work as a secretary in New York City. And this is very important to the story. She was a very highly skilled stenographer. It was famously said that she could take shorthand notes faster than people could speak. So that was a very highly valuable skill and very highly valued by Oswald Chambers. So she and Oswald, they fell in love on board the ship, and they kept up a correspondence while she was in New York and he was on his missions. And in 1910, they went back to the UK and they married. And then the next year, they opened together a Bible training college in London, with Oswald serving as the principal and the head teacher, and Biddy serving as lady superintendent. So she was taking care of the house and the students' needs and all of that, but that wasn't her only job. Her other job was to take shorthand notes of all of Oswald's lectures and sermons. So in that early correspondence, they had talked about what they called the dream of the books. They dreamed that one day they'd be together, Oswald would preach and teach, and Biddy would take notes, and then later they would turn them into books and publish them. So this was the beginning phase of that plan. But, Philip, then life happened, right? In 1913. Yeah.
Often does.
That's right. They had a daughter whom they named Kathleen. And then, of course, the following year, the war broke out. So in 1915, Oswald Chambers, he had been feeling that God was calling him to join the war effort. So he took a position with the YMCA to serve as a chaplain to British troops stationed in the desert outside Cairo in Egypt. And Biddy and Kathleen actually came to join him when Kathleen was just 3 years old. So very young, in my opinion, to be going on this kind of adventure. But it was very good that they came because just 2 years later, in 1917, Oswald Chambers died. He contracted appendicitis, and he was operated on in an Army field hospital, but he died a few days later of complications. So he was just 43 years old. And you'll notice, Philip, that in that story, I didn't mention My Utmost for His Highest or any books by Oswald Chambers. At the time he died, he was really not very well known. He had published 2 small booklets and numerous articles, some of them with God's Revivalist, the publication of God's Bible School and college, but he really wasn't known outside of holiness circles. But what he left behind him were his wife's notes of his sermons and lectures. And more importantly, or equally as importantly, he left behind him this wife. Almost as soon as Oswald died, Biddy began turning her notes into pamphlets and then into books. But it wasn't until 10 years later that she produced the manuscript of My Utmost for His Highest. It appeared in England in 1927 and in the United States only in 1935. So this is nearly 20 years after Oswald Chambers' death, which is quite something. And just a bit more on Biddy, she ended up publishing more than 30 books from her notes of his teachings. And she even founded an association, the Oswald Chambers Publications Association, which was essentially a small group of volunteers. And they would help with what she called the work of the books. And she really needed that help because she also was running a boarding house for students in London and, of course, raising Kathleen on her own. So, and that's the association that exists. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, the vision that they had as a couple actually did happen. It just happened in a very different way than what they expected, which is a great life lesson in that, right? Because she was still able to take all of his talks and sermons and lectures and turn them. I'm curious, when this was done in 1920, 1930, were devotionals a thing?
You might know Streams in the Desert by L.B. Cowman. That's a very big one. He actually, there's a picture of Oswald and Biddy with Letty Cowman. They were, I forget where, but they did a missionary trip with her. So, but he also read, you had Charles Spurgeon's morning and evening devotionals, which was just, Spurgeon was just massive, in the UK in the Victorian era. And so they would have been steeped in this kind of literature. Sure. Yeah. It's funny. It's always amazing to me that it took her 10 years to kind of land on this format because, of course, she had published lots of other books before, and none of them had really hit the way that Utmost hit. Utmost really hit, and it kind of remains the only book of his out of these 30 books that has, enjoyed this kind of success. So I think it's a genius stroke of hers and of Biddy's, and just
so it's really a lot of the structure and work. So the devotionals and those of you who have read it or received the copy, it's done on a daily basis for a year. So there's a date associated with it, and then a devotional. So he didn't necessarily have the vision to produce 365 individual devotionals to be bound together as a unit, to be an encouragement to Christ followers. That was really all Biddy's work.
Yes, that was really all Biddy's work. Yes.
And it would have been portions of lectures or portions of sermons. So she probably did a lot of assimilation of her notes to kind of pull together each individual devotional.
Yes. If we talk about how we produce, this is the version that we just put out. When we talk about this, I'll go into some of the choices that she made. Yeah.
Okay. Really, so then talk about, Talk about you then. So that was a great context to who Oswald Chambers was. What led you to be so involved with the association specifically, or in general, but then specifically the rewrite of this?
Right. So I met the Publications Association first when I was working on a memoir about growing up reading My Utmost for His Highest. So I'll just give you a bit of background about that. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas in the 1980s and 90s, and Utmost was just wildly popular in this time and place. I began reading it in my teens. It was a gift from my grandmother, and I really fell in love with it as soon as I started reading it, and I just kept reading it year after year. I took it with me to college. I went to college in New York, and I majored in history in college. And, I always had it in the back of my mind. I did medieval history, so kind of the history of Christianity, but I always had Utmost in my mind as something I thought somebody should do a historical study of this book, because there was really nothing out there. And when I was 30, I had been working in journalism in New York. I was an editor at the New Yorker for about 8 years. And I just decided I wanted to do it. So I wrote a proposal and sold the book on proposal. And in the course of researching that book, I came across the publication's website, and I just wrote to them and I said, I'm researching a book about Oswald Chambers and My Utmost for His Highest, and I'm really curious about you, and can I interview you? So that was it's more than 15 years ago. And over the years, I was able to get to know the board. They were very helpful in guiding me to the right documents and also telling me stories about Biddy and Kathleen, because a lot of them had actually known Biddy and known Kathleen before they died. Biddy died in the 60s and Kathleen in the late 90s, I think. So I really developed this relationship with them. And over the years, we've been able to do lots of Chambers-related projects together, like conferences, essay collections, podcasts, this new edition that we're talking about. And I'm just helping with the editing of a new French translation. So it's just been a really amazing ongoing relationship that I think will keep going.
Yeah, well, that's terrific. And your story, it could probably be recounted thousands of times. My first copy was given to me by as a high school graduation gift before going on to somebody
Right.
did some pretty good marketing, because I think a lot of people upon high school graduation got it before going to college. And
Yes.
and it was just a constant. I remember for me, and this kind of goes into the next question. I struggled with the language of it. Where I certainly had an appreciation for it, and I read it as part of my normal routine, but the language of it, like you kind of had to go slow, and on occasion a couple of words I like. So what exactly is meant here? So you did the rewrite. So why the rewrite? And what would you say were some of the challenging aspects of doing the rewrite?
Right. So, Philip, like we've been saying, My Utmost for His Highest is a classic. It has been a bestseller without fail, without any break in its bestseller status for almost 100 years. So this is not a book that one thinks, oh my goodness, we really need to rewrite this so someone will read it again. Not at all. But at the same time, there has been a very general acknowledgement of the fact that over the years it has become more and more difficult to understand because it's written in this very dated Victorian English. And also that there are some of its entries which don't seem to make sense as individual or standalone entries. So there was an update done in the early 90s, which is very good, but it was a very faithful update. It aimed at modernizing the language while keeping the text totally intact. Our challenge, when I was talking to the board about this, I knew from the book I'd done on Oswald and Utmost, and from reading all of his other works, these 30 books. I mean, there's like thousands of pages, right? I knew that essentially Biddy had selected the excerpts from Utmost. I wouldn't say at random, but let's say maybe pretty quickly.
Yeah.
She was at this point 10 years into creating books, and she was really churning them out. And I think she was selecting them rapidly and maybe not paying too much attention to the question of whether each could stand alone, whether there was enough context to grasp the full meaning, Oswald's full meaning. Initially she was sending out these pamphlets and books to his former students, right? And people in the holiness movement who probably they already would have known the context. But obviously for us, we're reading in a much, a very different time, and the readership is much larger than that now. So that was one issue. And the other issue was that Biddy never wanted to change any of Oswald's words. She just didn't want to edit him at all. So she would just take the excerpt and stick it in. And this could pose problems because Oswald himself, he always preached and taught without the aids of outlines or notes. So he spoke as the Spirit moved him, and he was often quoting other people, poets, philosophers, preachers, and he wouldn't name them. And because he was speaking slightly off the cuff, he might misquote them, right? So now none of these things are like huge issues, but in fact, he and Biddy, they did have this plan, this publishing plan, which they had detailed in their correspondence. And we do have one or two examples of articles that Chambers edited in his own hand, kind of after the fact. And they are very, very different from the ones that Biddy produced. They're very carefully cited. The references in them are very carefully cited, and they're very polished. They're very easy to read. So, I think we really felt emboldened by this knowledge to try and contextualize and polish the main text of My Utmost for His Highest. That said, there is very little of my own writing in this book. My aim was rather to consider each daily reading in Utmost in the context of the sermon or lecture that Biddy took it from. Basically, I went back to the original sermons, the original lectures. I read the text surrounding the excerpt, and if I found something which I thought was essential to clarifying Oswald's point, I added it in. We did update the vocabulary. We changed the Bible version from KJV to NIV. But it was very important to me that this book, which has Oswald Chambers' name and his name alone on the cover, that it contained the words of Oswald Chambers.
Yeah.
So
that's well, you've done an amazing job, and I think to the reader of the devotionals, that just provides a depth to it. That boy, the research that you did, and like I said at the top of the show, it took you 3 years to do this. So reading of sermons to get the full context of where an excerpt or a devotional is pulled from, to help the reader have a better understanding of what Oswald was talking about. That's an incredible skill set. In fact, I've heard from multiple people, at least a dozen times now, who have received the devotional, who received it like I did when, however many years ago, and are sitting, and they'll read the devotional side by side and look at what the shifts or the changes or the context that you provided. And to a person, no one has said, "Oh, this is, she did a horrible work to a classic," right? To a person, they're like, "Wow, this is really, really well done." So, kudos to you for all of that research and honoring him, honoring his wife as well, and putting together something that I think is positioned to continue the legacy and make an impact for the kingdom of God. So good job. Are you able? I'm just curious because you've read it all. Are you able to distill to one favorite devotional?
Yes. Whenever I get this question, the one that always jumps into my head is September 6th. So
and that was just recently. Yeah.
It was recently, yes.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, Philip, at this point, I've read My Utmost for His Highest so much that all dates are like blended. I read it out of order now. I've given myself permission.
Yeah, you can. I think you've earned that opportunity.
Yes. So I would point to September 6th. It's called Diffusiveness of Life. I'm just going to read a bit of it
Please
here.
do. Yep.
The text for it is John 7:38. Whoever believes in me, as scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. So this really showcases, I think, Oswald's like the depth of his thought, but also his personality. So the entry uses a river as a metaphor for life and for how God wants us to live. The opening line is really philosophical. A river touches places of which its source knows nothing. Okay. Then Chambers goes on to speak about the purpose of our lives, how we may not always know the purpose, how we might look at ourselves, look at our lives and think, I'm useless, I have no purpose, but how nevertheless God is using our lives for his own purpose. But the entry doesn't stop there. It expands to talk about, what's causing this anxiety about our purpose. Chambers talks about our focus. Are we focusing on the obstacles in our course? Are we looking frantically for the evidence of our own usefulness, our own, value in this world? Or are we keeping our eyes on God? Are we keeping our eyes on the source? He says a river flows around and over every obstacle in its course. And that's how the rivers in our souls can be if we keep our eyes on God instead of concentrating on the obstacle. From there, Chambers expands to talk about how these living waters are going to flow through us to bless others, whether we see it or not. My Utmost for His Highest is a very outward-looking book. It's sometimes been criticized for being too focused on personal spirituality, but I think it's completely outward directed. Any focus on personal spirituality is about going out, and it's very obvious in this reading.
I think that one is almost, even as you talk about it, the theme permeates the other 364 devotionals. And that's what I appreciate about it is, and it's interesting that you mentioned that that's some of the criticism, because I would disagree. I would totally disagree with that, because that's.
I mean, I would too. I have.
Yeah. Where you are spiritually, personally is a springboard into the outward of motivation of why we do what we do. And that's what I appreciate about it. And it's this constant, and we don't know totally everything that was going on in his life. You know more than I know. But it's clear that he went through struggles, because he writes, and Biddy writes about it, of not focusing on those things and keeping our eyes on Christ, keeping our eyes on God, the bigger picture, and not allowing circumstances to dictate how we then respond. So it's interesting that you brought September 6th. As you even read it, I just read it because we're close to it, and it does such a good job of really talking about everything that he wrote about. So believe it or not, Macy, we are at the end of our episode. We have a couple minutes left here. He wrote this in a period, and I think sometimes one of the faults that we have is when we look back at, we think our times are the worst times, that no one else has lived the way we live. And yet, he lived during very difficult times, during world wars. And off the research that you've done, what you know of Oswald, what you know of Biddy, and through his writings, what would you say, his current assessment of where we are today in culture and the church?
Mm-hmm. So, Philip, Oswald Chambers, he would never make some grand assessment of where we are in culture or the church. He almost never spoke about current events, not even when he was in the midst of a war. One verse really sums up his thinking on this topic. John 16:33, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. So, are you still in the world? if you are, you have trouble, right? Very, very early in the war, his students were clamoring for him to address what was happening. And he did write this brief talk. It's really the only one of its kind. And in it, he said, "Why are you surprised by this war? It has been said, in this world, you will have trouble." So that sounds a bit callous. And later, he did produce a book about suffering. It's an amazing book, a study of Job called Baffled to Fight Better, to address all the suffering he saw around him in the army camp. But in terms of addressing, specific current events and how we're supposed to deal with them or think about them, his answer would be, it doesn't matter what's going on around you, whether it's a beautiful sunny day and everything's great, or whether there is a world war at your doorstep. Your job or your calling as a Christian, it's always the same. It's to engage in intercessory prayer. And if you have received the call to discipleship, it's to preach the gospel, to go and make disciples. That's it. Your eyes, your mind, your attention should always be on eternal things, on the source of that river, right? And you should always be praying. He often said prayer isn't a support for the life of a Christian. It is the life.
It is the life.
That might be a little unsatisfying, but I think that is honestly,
but it's spot on. But it's spot on, and it shows the depth of spiritual maturity that he had, and even you sharing that story of his students wanting him to respond, and his response being, we're going to have troubles. Well, welcome to the human condition. But his solution is to focus more on God and our relationship with him. So, Macy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us today.
Yes, thank you. It was great being with you.
Yeah. And if you'd like to purchase Macy's memoir, which is titled My Utmost, give me the title again.
My Utmost, a devotional memoir. So
there we go. Which is what she wrote before the rewrite of the devotional. That is available on Amazon, and we'll make sure that we put a link in the show description for that. And if you'd like a little bit more information too about the work of the various publications from the association, there is a website, utmost.org, and we'll put a link to that in our description, and you can find out more information. And we're so pleased to be partnering with Our Daily Bread and the generosity of so many donors who gave in our Leading Higher Capital campaign, so that we can distribute this classic rewrite, a modernized version, 50,000 copies to our students across biblical higher education. And we'll step back and we'll look forward to see what God does through this amazing work. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.
The Biblical Higher Ed Talk podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.